I wanted to take a minute to go over my favorite gap fillers because I've seen a bunch of things that people use, and I don't like to use Bondo because I work in the house and I don't really have enough ventilation. And wood filler I looked at, but I've used wood filler for wood projects and I'm not really great on it. The package, I don't know, the stuff always dries out and it's no good in a couple of weeks, and I need something that I can stick in a container and it'll be good in a month or so. Maybe it's just my environment or the packaging, but wood filler always goes bad on me. Basically, what I like to use is either Epoxy Sculpt, Odie Fix-It Stick, or now I've started using Magic Sculpt. And the big question is always, what's the difference between Magic Sculpt and Epoxy Sculpt? And basically, they're almost exactly the same product. There really is very little difference between the two, I find anyway. If you're looking at it for sculpting, it might be different, but we're using this in this instance for gap filling and groove filling and things like that. And what's important for that is, can you thin it out with water, and how do thin sections of it adhere to the model? And as you can see, the orange stuff is the Epoxy Sculpt, and there's barely any there to create a smooth surface, and it holds like iron. And I've also used here, this is Magic Sculpt. It's on there for good. Both hold in very thin sections, both hold very well, both smooth out very well, both sand, file, I think drill very well. You could probably do almost anything you want to it. Now, the only thing, and this might just be my opinion, is it seems like Epoxy Sculpt cures a little bit harder than Magic Sculpt. And that might be because, well, the hardener, this is a sample of Epoxy Sculpt. The hardener and the resin are pretty much the same consistency in Magic Sculpt, but the hardener is the same for Magic Sculpt as it is for Epoxy Sculpt. It's the same consistency, but the resin is a little more mushy. It's a little marshmallowy in texture, and I don't know if that has anything to do with it. I'm not a chemist. This is only kind of my impressions from filing and sanding it, but it still seems a little softer than Epoxy Sculpt. Now, I've tried adding slightly more hardener than resin. Maybe that would harden it up, but I don't want to go too far because then, you know, I'll be left with all of this resin that's useless. So I'd rather use it in a one-in-one consistency and, you know, be able to use the whole thing. And as you can see, this fills gaps perfectly. This part is smooth, and it's really hard to tell until you put a primer over it. That really shows where all your mistakes are. But if you run your fingernail over it and it doesn't catch, you've usually got a pretty smooth surface. And you can see all in here, I've used the Epoxy Sculpt here. I've used it here to fill some, you know, I had a little lines here that were noticeable. All of this will cover up with Rust-Oleum. I use Rust-Oleum filler sander, a couple of coats of that, maybe a little light sanding between coats, and it'll all vanish to give you a smooth, glossy surface. Here, and then this is what I like to use the epoxy mainly for. Sometimes I want a hard, crisp edge. And this stuff you can file and sand, and that's really what it's good for me. I was able to really go back into this and crisp up all of these lines, and that's what I like. Now, the third thing I use, I've got here Odie Fix-It Stick. Now, you can get this at Lowe's and Home Depot. It's about $9. It's actually probably a little more expensive because for what you get. Now, this is probably half a tube. There was probably that much more. The thing about it is, you see the way you get it. You get the A and the B wrapped around each other. So you can cut it in half and then cut that slice in half. But the problem is you can't take quarters and eighths because then you'll get your A and your B, you won't get enough, and then it won't harden correctly. But this stuff cures in like 10 minutes to rock hard. And that's great because if you need to make a lot of fixes or you need to make you know, you just need to fix something really quick, this will cure in 5-10 minutes tops, and you're good to go. You can paint, you can file, you can sand. Where the downside with the Magic Sculpt and the Epoxy Sculpt is that they take a good 20-24 hours to cure completely. And the problem, like, you know, I worked on this top, I put all around it. So I work on one side, then I move it, and I forget, and I touch it, and then I mush it, and I gotta go back and fix it. So what I end up doing is working on one half, letting it cure, then the next day work on the other half, letting it cure, and then, oh, I missed a spot here. And it could take several days to finish a piece because you have to really give it that 24 hours to completely cure. So that's the downside to the resins. That kind of sucks. So that's the good side to this. But with this, you always end up wasting stuff. So, got to take the good with the bad.